The first time I realized something was deeply wrong, I was sitting in my truck at the edge of my driveway, staring out over the flat farmland that stretched for miles. I live in southern Indiana, not far from the Ohio River. My family has owned this land for generations, mostly corn and soybeans, with patches of woods along the back. Nights out here are quiet in a way most people never experience. There are no streetlights, no neighbors in sight, no steady hum of traffic, just the sound of cicadas in summer, the occasional yip of a coyote, and the vast, star-studded sky overhead. It was late August, and I had just finished a long day in the fields. I parked my truck at the top of the driveway, taking a moment to drink the last of my coffee and watch the stars before heading inside. That's when I saw it, a bright light low on the horizon, where no light should have been. At first, I figured it was a plane. We get them now and then, but the nearest airport is far enough that planes usually fly much higher. This light was different. It was brighter, larger, and it didn't blink. It hovered. I told myself it was probably a crop duster, though it was too late for anyone to be flying. Still, I forced myself to look away, shut off the truck, and head inside. I didn't want to start thinking about strange lights. Out here, when you're alone as often as I am, your mind can play tricks on you. But later that night, lying in bed, I woke up to a sound I couldn't place. It was a low vibration, almost like the hum of a large engine, except it wasn't steady. It pulsed. The glass of water on my nightstand trembled with each wave. My dog, Buddy, a big old hound mix, stood at the window, growling low in his throat. I sat up, my heart thudding, and tried to calm him, but he wouldn't stop. That's when I saw the glow seeping through the edges of the blinds. I forced myself out of bed and pulled them back just an inch. My stomach dropped. Out in the field, maybe 200 yards from the house, the same light hovered above the corn. It was bigger now, glowing white with a faint bluish tinge, and it illuminated the stalks beneath it as if it were midday. I watched, frozen, as the light shifted side to side with impossible smoothness, stopping on a dime, then zipping to the other side of the field in an instant. No plane, no helicopter, no drone could move like that. The hum grew louder, resonating through the walls, through my chest. I dropped the blinds, stumbled back, and grabbed the shotgun from the corner. Buddy barked furiously, pacing the window. I wanted to believe it was some kind of military test, something explainable, but deep down, I knew I was seeing something I shouldn't. After maybe a minute, the light shot straight up into the sky, faster than anything I'd ever seen. In the blink of an eye, it was gone. The silence afterward was suffocating. My ears rang from the sudden absence of that vibration. I stayed awake until sunrise, shotgun across my lap, staring out the window. The next morning I walked out to the field, though every nerve in my body screamed not to. Sure enough, where the light had been, the corn was flattened in a perfect circle. Stalks bent but not broken, spiraled clockwise. The ground itself was warm to the touch, and when I crouched down, I realized even the insects were gone. Not one cricket, not one beetle. The area was silent. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? Folks around here don't take kindly to stories about flying saucers. You'd be the laughingstock of every feed store and diner in the county. So I kept my mouth shut and tried to convince myself it was a one-time thing. But it wasn't. 2 weeks later, I was driving home from a friend's place around 11 at night. The back roads were deserted, the only light my headlights cutting through the dark. That's when I saw it again. Hovering above the tree line about half a mile ahead, bright, steady, too big to be a star or plane. I slowed down, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles whitened. The light moved closer, drifting toward the road. My heart raced. Then, without warning, the truck engine sputtered and died. The headlights cut out, and I was plunged into darkness. The steering locked, the brakes stiffened. I coasted to a stop, panic rising in my throat. Buddy whined in the back seat, pressing himself against the door. The light descended until it hovered directly above the truck. The hum returned, rattling the windshield. I sat frozen, unable to breathe, shotgun useless in the back. A white beam shot down from the light, enveloping the truck in blinding brilliance. My skin prickled with static. Every hair on my body stood on end. And then silence. The light vanished. The engine roared back to life, as if nothing had happened. Headlights flared on. I slammed the gas pedal, speeding down the road, not daring to look back. When I finally pulled into my driveway, shaking, I noticed something on my forearm, a mark. 3 small, perfectly round dots arranged in a triangle. They weren't scratches, not burns, they looked like tiny punctures, clean and precise. I hadn't felt anything, hadn't seen anything touch me. But they were there. That night I dreamed of the light, of figures standing at the edge of my bed, tall, thin, with eyes too large, too black. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, certain I wasn't alone. Buddy growled low from the corner, staring at the same spot I had seen them in my dream. Except I wasn't dreaming anymore. From that night on, everything changed. The lights came back, not every night, but often enough that I started dreading sunset. Sometimes I'd see them hovering above the woods, sometimes streaking silently across the sky. Once I woke to find the entire bedroom bathed in white light, every shadow erased. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I lay paralyzed, my body vibrating with that same low hum, while dark figures loomed over me. When I finally jerked awake, the room was dark again, but the clock showed 3 hours had passed. Days blurred. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The puncture marks on my arm faded, only to reappear weeks later in different places. My leg, my shoulder, my neck. Always 3 dots, always in a triangle. I tried to confide in my cousin, the only family I'm close with. He listened quietly as I spilled everything, then told me I needed rest, that I was working too hard, maybe drinking too much. But as I showed him the marks, his face paled. He didn't say much after that, just told me to be careful driving at night. Things escalated one evening in late October. I was in the living room watching TV when Buddy suddenly leapt to his feet, barking furiously at the back door. My blood ran cold as a shadow passed across the window. Not a person, something taller, thinner, moving with unnatural smoothness. I grabbed the shotgun and yanked the door open, aiming into the yard. Nothing. Just the cornfield swaying in the wind. But Buddy growled, his hackles raised, eyes locked on the edge of the clearing. That's when I saw it. 2 enormous black eyes reflecting in the moonlight. I fired. The blast echoed through the night, scattering birds from the trees. The figure vanished, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. Buddy bolted into the field, barking wildly. I called him back, but he didn't return for nearly an hour. When he finally did, he was trembling, whining, and he had a small, round burn mark on his side. After that, I stopped sleeping altogether. I sat up every night with the lights on, shotgun in hand, waiting. Sometimes nothing happened. Other nights, I'd hear the hum, faint at first, then building until the walls vibrated. The lights would seep through the blinds, the electronics in the house would flicker, and I'd feel that same paralyzing fear take hold. The worst part wasn't what I saw. It was what I couldn't remember. I started losing time. Hours gone with no explanation. I'd wake up in the barn, lying on the dirt floor, no idea how I'd gotten there. Once, I woke up standing in the middle of the road, half a mile from my house, barefoot, the soles of my feet raw and bleeding. I tried recording myself, setting up cameras in the house, but the footage never survived. Either the files were corrupted, or the cameras would shut off the moment the lights appeared. Once, the camera captured only static, and in the static, for a few seconds, a distorted image of a face with black eyes staring straight into the lens. I don't know why they chose me. I don't know what they want. All I know is that it hasn't stopped. It's been nearly a year now. The marks keep appearing, the lights keep returning, and every time I think it's over, every time I convince myself I've imagined it all, I wake up to that hum vibrating through my chest. I don't tell people anymore. What's the point? They'll think I'm crazy. Maybe I am. But I know what I've seen, what I've felt. And I know it's not over. Because last night, as I sat awake in the living room, Buddy asleep at my feet, I heard a knock at the back door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. When I opened it, no one was there. But in the dirt just beyond the porch, 3 long, narrow footprints led into the field. And in the distance, the light was waiting. Story, the end. I was 22 the first time I saw something I couldn't explain, and to this day I still can't tell you exactly what it was. All I know is that it wasn't human, and it wasn't anything we were ever supposed to see. It happened in the fall of 1998, on a lonely stretch of road outside of Laramie, Wyoming. I had just finished my shift at a small hardware store where I worked to pay for community college, and I was driving home a little after midnight. The road between town and the small farmhouse I rented was 20 miles of flat nothingness, a two-lane blacktop cutting straight through open fields and patches of thick pine woods. Out there, you could drive 10 minutes without seeing another set of headlights, and on that night, I was completely alone. The air was crisp, my radio barely pulling in a station, and I was halfway through the drive when I noticed lights in the distance. At first, I thought it was another vehicle coming toward me, but the lights didn't look right. They weren't headlights. They were too high off the ground, glowing white with a faint bluish tint, and they didn't move like anything I'd seen before. They shifted, hovering over the tree line, sliding one way, then the other. I slowed my car, squinting, trying to make sense of it. The lights pulsed, almost like they were breathing. I remember thinking maybe it was a helicopter, but there was no sound. Out in the country, sound carries for miles, and I should have heard the thrum of rotors. Instead, it was dead silent, so quiet that the blood rushing in my ears seemed deafening. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I had the sudden, overwhelming urge to keep driving. But curiosity got the better of me. I pulled onto the gravel shoulder and shut off my engine. The night was still. I stepped out of the car, gravel crunching under my boots, and stared at the lights. That's when they dropped lower, slipping behind the trees like something was descending. My stomach knotted. For a second, I thought maybe I should just get back in the car and go, but then I noticed something that froze me where I stood. There was movement in the field across from me. At first, I thought it was a deer, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was upright. Tall, thin, too tall to be a person, maybe 7 or 8 feet. It glided more than walked, its long limbs moving awkwardly, like it wasn't used to having them. I couldn't make out its face, only that its head was large, elongated, and it seemed to be reflecting the glow from those strange lights. My chest tightened, and I ducked behind my car, peeking over the hood. The figure stopped in the field, tilting its head in my direction. I swear to God it knew I was there. My pulse hammered as it started moving toward me, slow but steady. That's when another light dropped from the sky, bright and unnatural, bathing the field in white. The figure froze, turned its head upward, and then, just like that, it was gone. Not walked away, not ran. It was there 1 second, gone the next, like it had blinked out of existence. I stumbled into my car, hands shaking, and fumbled with the keys. My engine roared to life, and I tore out of there so fast I kicked gravel for 30 feet. I didn't look back, not once, until I pulled into my driveway and ran into the house. I locked every door, shut every curtain, and sat awake until dawn, clutching the old shotgun my landlord had left in the closet. The next morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. I told myself I was tired from work, that the lights were some kind of aircraft, and that the figure in the field was just a trick of the shadows. For a few days, I almost believed that. Then the dream started. Every night, I'd dream of standing in that field again, staring at the figure. But in the dreams, it didn't vanish. It kept coming, closer and closer until it stood right in front of me. Its face wasn't smooth like I remembered. It had huge, black, reflective eyes that swallowed me whole. In the dream, I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't breathe. Just stared as those eyes bored into me like it was peeling me open from the inside. I'd wake drenched in sweat, gasping for air, heart pounding so hard I thought it would give out. I didn't tell anyone at first. Who would believe me? But then, a week later, something happened that I couldn't dismiss as a dream. I woke up in my bed to find my window wide open, even though I never opened it. My sheets were damp, my feet muddy, as though I'd been outside. On my arm was a small mark, a perfect circle burned into the skin, raised and red like it had been seared with something. I couldn't explain it. I started asking around quietly at school and at work, testing the waters with questions about strange lights or odd things in the woods. Most people laughed it off, but one old rancher, a customer at the hardware store, pulled me aside after hearing me ask. He said, "You don't go chasing those lights, son. You see them, you look the other way. They're not for us." He wouldn't say more, no matter how much I pressed. From then on, things escalated. I'd be driving home late and see shapes moving in the woods, keeping pace with my car. At night, I'd wake to find my clock blinking the wrong time, hours missing from my memory. I'd hear faint humming, mechanical but alive, vibrating through the walls of my house. Once I woke to find myself standing outside in the yard, staring up at the sky, with no memory of getting out of bed. The fear consumed me. I stopped sleeping properly, stopped focusing in class, stopped talking to my friends. Every sound became a trigger: the creak of the house, the bark of a dog down the road, the distant hum of machinery. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched constantly, observed by something that was waiting for me to let my guard down. The worst night came about a month after the first encounter. I had forced myself to stay up late, watching TV with every light in the house on. Around 3 a.m., the TV flickered to static, then cut out completely. The house went dead silent, like the power had been cut, but I could still hear that faint hum outside, deeper this time, vibrating through my chest. I grabbed the shotgun, crept to the window, and peeked outside. There, hovering just above the treetops, was a massive triangular craft, its underside lined with pale white lights. It made no sound, but the pressure of it was crushing, like the air itself was being pulled apart. I stumbled back, heart racing, and that's when I saw them. 3 figures standing in my yard, tall and thin, silhouetted by the glow from the craft. They didn't move like people. They swayed slightly, their limbs too long, their heads tilting unnaturally. One of them raised an arm, and the next thing I knew, I was on the floor, my vision fading, my body refusing to move. When I came to, it was morning. My shotgun was on the floor beside me, the lights in the house working again, everything seemingly normal. But there were new marks on my body. Thin, straight cuts along my legs and arms, too precise to be scratches, too shallow to be anything surgical. And I felt different. Off. Like something inside me had been disturbed, shifted. I tried to live with it, tried to pretend I was just losing my mind. But the truth is, once you've seen something like that, once you've been touched by it, you can't go back to normal. I still see the lights sometimes, hovering over the woods, darting through the fields. I still wake in the night to find my window open, my sheets damp, my skin marked with burns and cuts I can't explain. I know they're real. I know they're out there. And I know they're not done with me. Story, the end. It was late summer when I decided to drive cross-country by myself. I had been putting it off for years, always finding excuses, but after quitting a job I hated, and before starting a new one, I thought it would be the perfect in-between adventure. My plan was loose: start in Ohio, where I lived, and head west with no strict schedule. I was 31, single, and eager to feel something outside of the monotony I had grown used to. I had no idea the trip would lead me into something I'd spend the rest of my life trying to understand, something that still leaves me sleepless some nights when the memories surface too vividly. The first week of the drive was fine. I stuck to highways most of the time, stopping at little motels, roadside diners, and the occasional national park. By the time I reached the far stretches of Nebraska, the flat landscapes and endless fields made me feel like I was driving through a painting. Towns became smaller and further apart, and cell service was inconsistent. I didn't mind. It gave me that feeling of escape I had been craving. But the further west I went, the more I noticed the silence. It was a silence that wasn't just about noise, but about presence, as if life itself thinned out the further I drove. One particular night, I was cutting through a desolate 2-lane highway in the panhandle of Nebraska. I remember it because I had left a small diner in Alliance just before dusk. The waitress had given me directions toward a cheaper motel about 60 miles down the road. I thought it was an easy enough drive, but halfway through, the night dropped fast and hard. Out there weren't many streetlights or buildings, just black skies pressed down on flat land, the stars stark against the void. It was around 10:30 when I realized I hadn't seen another car in over half an hour. Then something unusual happened. Ahead of me, maybe 200 yards, a strange light appeared. At first, I thought it was another vehicle approaching, but it wasn't like headlights. It was a single hovering glow, bluish-white, faint at first, then sharp. It didn't move like a car. Instead, it floated above the ground, maybe 20 or 30 feet in the air. I slowed down, uneasy, trying to make sense of it. I rolled down my window, thinking maybe it was a tower light or a plane in the distance, but there was no sound, just the soft hum of my car and the faint whistle of wind outside. The light grew brighter, almost like it was reacting to me. My chest tightened, and every instinct told me to turn around. But before I could even touch the wheel, the light shot upward into the sky so fast it blurred into nothing. Gone, like it had never been there. I sat frozen in the middle of that road for a long time, staring at the emptiness ahead. Finally, I told myself I was tired, that my eyes were playing tricks, that long stretches of highway could make anyone see strange things. I forced my car forward, hands gripping the wheel, heart still pounding. When I reached the motel the waitress mentioned, it was close to midnight. The place was run down but lit with a neon vacancy sign. Inside, the man at the counter looked half asleep, his skin leathery, his voice gruff. I booked a room and hauled my bag inside. The place smelled faintly of mildew, but I was too drained to care. I lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, replaying the light in my mind, trying to convince myself it had to be explainable. Exhaustion won, and eventually I fell asleep. That night, I dreamed of bright blue light filling my room. Not the dim, distant kind I'd seen on the highway, but blinding, all-consuming light. In the dream, I couldn't move, like something pinned me down. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. When I woke, sweat soaked my shirt, and the clock on the nightstand read 3:14 a.m. The room was quiet, yet the fear lingered so strongly I sat upright the rest of the night with the lamp on, too unnerved to close my eyes. The next morning, I checked out and told myself it was nothing, just stress, fatigue, a trick of my brain. But as I drove, unease followed me. Every reflective road sign, every flicker on the horizon set my nerves off. By the second day, I decided to cut through a more rural back road in Wyoming instead of sticking to the interstate. That was a mistake I'll regret forever. Around late afternoon, the road narrowed into gravel. My GPS cut out, and I hadn't seen a house or car in hours. The only thing around me were rolling plains and distant buttes, barren and isolated. The sun was starting to dip low when I saw something in the sky again. It wasn't the same as before. This time it was 3 lights, faint at first, moving in a triangle formation high above. They didn't blink like planes, and they didn't follow the same pattern. They drifted, then stopped, hovering silently. My mouth went dry, and I slowed the car to a crawl, staring upward. Suddenly the lights dropped lower. They weren't blinding, not yet, but their descent was deliberate, like they knew I was watching. I panicked, pressing the gas, kicking up gravel as I sped forward. But within seconds, my car engine sputtered. The radio crackled with static, and the dashboard lights flickered. Then the engine cut out completely. I was rolling, powerless, until I coasted to a stop on the side of the road. My heart hammered as silence swallowed everything around me. I tried the ignition over and over, but the key turned uselessly. That's when I realized the lights weren't in the sky anymore. They were just above the field to my right. The glow spread over the land like daylight, bathing everything in eerie blue. The air vibrated, a low hum that made my teeth ache. I couldn't breathe right. My chest felt compressed. I locked the car doors and crouched low in the seat, trembling. Through the windshield, I could see shapes moving in the light. Not human, not quite. They were tall, spindly, their limbs too long, their movements jerky but intentional. I froze, praying they wouldn't notice me, but deep down I knew they already had. Time blurred. I don't know how long I sat paralyzed, staring. The shapes shifted closer, their outlines sharp against the glow. My head rang with a pressure I can't describe, like my thoughts weren't mine anymore. I remember whispering please under my breath, though I didn't know who I was begging. Then, everything went blank. When I opened my eyes, I was still in my car, but it was broad daylight. My watch said 10:22 a.m. Hours had passed. My car engine started on the first try, as if nothing had been wrong. The gravel road stretched empty behind me, the plains silent. I drove until I hit a town, barely stopping for food, not speaking to anyone. But something was different. My body ached in strange ways, bruises on my arms, a soreness in my lower back, and a ringing in my ears that wouldn't go away. I felt disoriented, not just tired, but as though I had been somewhere I couldn't remember. The rest of the trip blurred into survival mode. I didn't stop anywhere longer than a night. I avoided dark stretches of road, but the lights followed me anyway. I'd see them at the edge of the horizon, faint but undeniable, like they wanted me to know they were still there. Some nights, I'd wake in motels with the sheets twisted around me, the clock hours ahead of what I remembered last. Once, I woke with dried mud on my shoes, though I hadn't left the room. I told myself I'd forget it once I got home, that it was just some psychological break from being alone on the road. But years later, I can't shake it. The dreams still come, blue light, paralysis, figures bending over me. And sometimes when I'm driving alone late at night, the radio will crackle with static for no reason, and the hair on my arms will rise. I know they're not finished with me. I know what I saw out there was real, and it wasn't just light in the sky. It was something that noticed me, chose me, and I don't think it's ever let go. Story the end. It started on a night that was quiet even for the country. I lived alone on the outskirts of a small town in northern New Mexico, a place where the desert stretches for miles, broken only by sparse juniper trees and distant mesas. The kind of isolation that feels peaceful during the day can become oppressive at night, and I had learned that lesson slowly over the months I'd lived there. The sun had set hours ago, and the sky was a deep, ink-black canvas sprinkled with stars so bright they almost hurt to look at. I was sitting on the porch, a cup of coffee in hand, listening to the wind shift through the scrub brush, my dog Max lying at my feet. The first sign that something wasn't right was subtle. A flicker of light far across the mesa, moving in a way that didn't match any plane I'd ever seen. It hovered, then darted sideways, too fast, too smooth. At first, I told myself it was probably a rancher with a spotlight checking his livestock, or maybe a small drone. But as I watched, the light pulsed, brighter and darker as if breathing, and moved in angles that defied the laws of physics. Max growled low in his throat, his ears pricked forward, staring intently at the field beyond the porch. I leaned forward, squinting into the darkness, my mind trying to rationalize what I was seeing. The light was getting closer, not flying at a great distance in the sky, but skimming low over the mesas, moving across the terrain as if it were searching for something. My chest tightened. I could feel my pulse in my ears. Max suddenly barked, a deep, guttural sound that made me flinch. Whatever that light was, it knew I was there. I retreated inside and locked the doors, my mind racing. I wanted to tell someone, call the sheriff, my parents, anyone, but the thought of explaining this seemed ridiculous. A human presence couldn't move like that, and the angles it followed were impossible. It didn't just hover, it shifted instantaneously from one spot to another like it was folding space. I turned off the lights and tried to wait it out, hoping it would leave. Then came the sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it was too precise, too deep, a low hum that seemed to vibrate in my chest. The hairs on my arms stood on end. Max growled again, pacing near the window. I crept over, careful not to make a sound, and peeked through the blinds. The light was closer now, a brilliant white orb hovering just beyond the tree line at the edge of the property. It cast a circle of illumination across the desert floor, making the shadows sharp and long. I froze. In the center of the light, I saw something. Something that didn't belong. A figure, tall and thin, standing perfectly still. Its limbs were elongated too long to be human, and the way it held itself was wrong, rigid but fluid at the same time. I couldn't see a face, but I knew it was looking toward my house. My stomach dropped, and I stumbled back from the window, heart racing. The orb suddenly brightened, pulsing like a heartbeat. The figure in the light tilted its head, and the sensation of being observed became unbearable. I could feel it in my bones, a pressure that made my chest constrict. Max barked violently, and the figure jerked slightly, half as if reacting to him. Then, in a motion that defied any natural movement, it vanished. The light shot straight up into the sky at an impossible speed, disappearing in an instant. I stayed awake the rest of the night, unable to sleep, watching the sky for any sign of its return. When morning came, I went out to the field cautiously. The place where the light had hovered was scorched, the ground warmed but not burned, and the grass was flattened in a perfect circle. At the center, there were 3 deep indentations, spaced too far apart to be human, too precise to be animal tracks. I didn't tell anyone. What would I say? That some impossible light came from nowhere and left 3 marks in my field? People would think I was insane. I tried to push it out of my mind, but the experience left a lingering sense of dread that I couldn't shake. 2 weeks later, it returned. This time, I was driving home late from town. The highway was empty, the only light coming from my headlights and the stars above. I noticed it first as a flicker at the edge of the mesa, then as a bright glow that followed me along the road. I slowed, heart pounding, and the glow mirrored every turn I made, keeping pace with me perfectly. My truck engine sputtered and died, leaving me in complete darkness. I sat frozen, gripping the wheel, feeling the hum in my chest again, growing louder, almost unbearable. The light descended, illuminating the truck in a harsh white glow. In that moment, I saw them. More than one this time. Tall, thin figures, their movements jerky and unnatural, but somehow coordinated. They floated rather than walked, hovering above the ground with a fluidity that was impossible. I wanted to scream, but my throat went dry. The hum intensified, vibrating through my skull, and then they were gone. The truck started again, lights flickering on, and the figures vanished as if they had never been there. I sped home, heart hammering, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. That night, I noticed marks on my forearm, 3 small, circular punctures in a triangle formation. I had no memory of being touched. Over the next few days, more marks appeared in different locations: my shoulder, my neck, my hand. They were clean, precise, and always 3 dots. I became obsessed with the pattern, counting the marks each morning, trying to find meaning. Sleep became impossible. I would wake in the middle of the night to see the glow outside the window, sometimes multiple lights, dancing above the mesas. Buddy, my dog, would growl and pace, staring at nothing, hair on end. Electronics in the house would flicker in rhythm with the pulsing hum. I began keeping a notebook, recording the times and locations of the lights, the patterns of movement, the sounds that accompanied them. Weeks turned into months. The encounters grew more frequent. One night, I awoke to the feeling of weight on the bed beside me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The hum filled the room. When I finally managed to open my eyes, I saw a shadow at the foot of the bed, impossibly tall, limbs elongated, the darkness of it absorbing the faint light in the room. I froze, unable to look away. Then it was gone, as quickly as it appeared, leaving a lingering pressure that made my body tremble. I tried telling myself I was imagining it, that isolation and stress were playing tricks on me. But Max's behavior proved otherwise. He would growl at empty corners, refuse to enter certain rooms, sometimes whimpering in terror for no discernible reason. The marks on my body continued to appear, always in the triangle pattern, sometimes accompanied by faint burns that healed too quickly to be natural. I set up cameras around the property, hoping for evidence. The first night, one of the cameras malfunctioned and caught only static. In the static, for a brief second, I saw a distorted figure with black almond-shaped eyes staring directly into the lens. After that, every camera either failed to record or showed nothing. I began to feel a pervasive dread, the sense that I was being studied, that someone or something was monitoring me, testing me. Driving became a nightmare. On multiple occasions, I would see the lights following me along back roads, perfectly synchronized with my movements. The truck would stall, electronics would fail, and the pulsing hum would fill the cab. Once I woke up on a dirt road half a mile from my house with no memory of driving there, scratches on my hands and knees. The truck parked neatly off the road as if someone had guided it. Months passed, and the encounters never stopped. They became part of daily life. I would avoid being outside at night, keep every light on, and always keep the doors locked. Sometimes I would wake to the hum vibrating through my chest, a silent warning or an invisible presence lingering just outside the walls. Then one night, the encounter escalated. I was in the living room, writing in my notebook, when Max suddenly leapt to the window, barking uncontrollably. Outside, hovering above the mesa, were multiple lights, larger than any I had seen before. The hum was deafening, shaking the house. The lights pulsed in unison, forming patterns in the air, then suddenly descended, converging in the field below the house. I ran to the porch, shotgun in hand, heart racing. In the glow, I saw them. Dozens of figures, impossibly tall and thin, limbs moving unnaturally, their heads tilted in ways that made my stomach churn. They floated above the ground, silent, observing. The air felt charged, heavy, and I felt my skin tingle as if something was brushing against it, though nothing touched me. Suddenly, the lights shot upward, disappearing instantly. The figures vanished. The hum stopped. Silence fell so suddenly that I thought my ears were ringing. The field was empty, but the ground bore the same patterns as before. 3 dots in triangles, scorched in the soil, perfectly aligned. After that night, the encounters became intermittent, less aggressive but still frequent enough to make normal life impossible. I learned to live with them, avoiding their attention, and never looking directly at the sky after dark. The marks continued to appear on my body, sometimes fading in hours, sometimes lasting days, always in threes. Max never left my side at night, alert to things I could not perceive. I have no idea why they chose me or what they want. Sometimes I wonder if they are studying me, observing human behavior, testing boundaries. Sometimes I feel they are waiting, patient beyond comprehension. There are nights when I wake in the middle of the dark, the hum vibrating in my chest, and I know without seeing it that they are near, just beyond the edge of perception. I have learned to move carefully in my own home, to avoid drawing attention, to live in the shadows of something incomprehensible. I do not drive at night alone anymore. I do not leave doors or windows open. I have given up on recording evidence. They do not respond to cameras or phones. They exist in a way I cannot document, cannot explain, and perhaps cannot survive if I try. The last encounter was a few nights ago. I was sitting on the porch, notebook in hand, Max lying beside me. The desert was quiet, the wind still. Then a faint flicker, low on the horizon, barely perceptible. The hum returned, soft at first, building gradually. I felt the weight in my chest, the prickling along my arms, the hairs standing on end. I did not move. I did not speak. I just waited. The light grew brighter, pulsing gently, forming a perfect circle in the distance. I could see the faint silhouettes, taller than any human, limbs elongated and wrong. They did not move toward me, not yet, but I knew they were aware. I felt their gaze, piercing, intelligent, patient. I closed my eyes for a moment, praying, though I did not know to whom. When I opened them, the light had vanished, the hum faded, and the desert returned to stillness. Max relaxed slightly but did not leave my side. The circle in the field remained, scorched earth and 3-dot indentations marking their presence. I do not know when they will return, only that they will, in some form, in some way, always patient, always watching. And so I live, in quiet terror, always aware of the night, always cautious of the dark, always knowing that beyond the horizon, beyond the desert, beyond the edge of perception, they wait, silent and impossible, studying me still. Story the end. It was a late October night in 2003 when I had the first encounter. The kind of night that starts ordinary and ends with your understanding of reality utterly shattered. I had just finished my shift at a gas station outside of Roswell, New Mexico, a quiet outpost along Highway 70 that barely saw traffic at night. The town itself was sleepy, already steeped in decades of UFO lore and conspiracy theories, but I never paid much attention to that kind of stuff. I didn't believe in aliens or paranormal activity. Until that night. I was driving home in my old pickup, the road cutting straight through miles of desert and scrubland. The sky was clear. The Milky Way spread out above me like a silver river, and the temperature had dropped enough that I had the heater on. My headlights illuminated the empty highway ahead, and the occasional coyote darting across the desert floor startled me enough to slam on the brakes more than once. I was halfway to my apartment when I first noticed it, a faint light hovering above the desert floor, maybe a half mile to the left of the highway. At first, I thought it was a fire, maybe someone camping illegally, but as I drove closer, I realized there was no smoke, no flicker, just a steady, almost electric glow, bluish-white in color. Curiosity overtook caution, and I slowed my truck to a crawl. I could see that the light seemed to hover about 3 feet off the ground, just beyond a ridge of low desert rocks. That's when I noticed the shape beneath it. It wasn't a person, not really. It had a humanoid silhouette, tall and lanky, with limbs that seemed elongated and slightly bent at unnatural angles. Its head was too large and slightly pointed at the top, and it was featureless, or at least I couldn't make out a face. Its skin seemed to shimmer in a way that was neither reflective nor matte. It almost looked translucent, like the light from above was passing through it. I froze behind the wheel. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. The figure didn't move like a human. It didn't step. It glided, sliding effortlessly across the uneven desert terrain, and then it turned its head toward me. Or at least, I think it did. I'm not even sure it had eyes, but the feeling of being looked at, of being entirely understood in an instant, was overwhelming. I slammed the truck into gear and floored it, my tires kicking up dust that glowed in my headlights. I dared a glance in the side mirror. The light followed. I don't know how fast it moved, but it was keeping pace with me. My truck, a 15-year-old Ford F-150, was already maxed out, but it didn't matter. The figure glided with an ease that defied physics, moving over rocks, dips, and desert brush, like it was nothing. I tried to shake it by taking a turn onto a dirt road leading to a smaller canyon, hoping the uneven terrain would slow it down. It didn't. Whatever it wasn't bound by the rules that govern humans or animals. I reached my apartment in record time, my hands still shaking as I slammed the door behind me. I checked every lock, every window. I couldn't breathe. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the building made my heart race, and every time a car passed on the main road, I imagined that figure gliding silently behind it, observing, waiting. The next day, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was an elaborate prank, a person in some kind of experimental suit, or perhaps even a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But when I spoke to coworkers and friends, I found I wasn't alone. One of the older cashiers at the gas station said she had seen strange lights over the desert many nights, and another mentioned seeing tall humanoid shapes in the distance, always near the lights. Nobody wanted to talk about it openly, though. There was a fear there, a shared understanding that speaking too loudly about it might attract attention. For the next week, I avoided driving alone at night. But I had classes and work that required nighttime travel, and eventually I had no choice. That's when I saw it again. This time, the encounter happened on the dirt roads near the Pecos River. I was driving with a friend, Mike, who had agreed to come with me after hearing my story. He was skeptical, laughing most of the way until the lights appeared over the desert again. This time, there were more of them. 3 lights, hovering at different heights, and beneath each figures that moved like nothing I had ever seen. Mike went pale. I could tell he wanted to laugh it off, but when he caught sight of them, all pretense vanished. The figures moved toward our truck, gliding almost floating, maintaining a precise distance from the vehicle. The lights above them pulsated faintly like a heartbeat, and the air seemed to thrum with static. I've never been so terrified in my life. My voice caught in my throat as I told Mike to drive faster. The lights and figures followed, and then the truck's headlights dimmed suddenly, even though the engine was running perfectly. It lasted for maybe 3 minutes, though it felt like an eternity, before the figures suddenly stopped at the edge of the desert and vanished, leaving the night completely silent. The lights flickered one last time and then were gone. Mike and I didn't speak for the rest of the drive back. When we arrived at my apartment, he wouldn't stay, insisting he needed to go home. I didn't blame him. Over the next several months, sightings became more frequent. Sometimes I'd see them while driving alone. Other times I'd catch glimpses through the window while working late at the gas station. The lights always appeared first, silent and unnatural, then the figures gliding impossibly across the terrain. I began documenting everything: time, location, weather conditions, what I saw. There was a pattern. They didn't approach humans directly unless provoked. They were observers, and they were patient. One night, I was returning from a late shift and decided to take the road near the old cattle ranch outside town. The sky was cloudy, and a wind had kicked up, rattling the cab of my truck. About 10 miles in, the road went dark. My headlights flickered and dimmed, and I realized the engine was stalling. That's when I saw them. 5 figures, tall, thin, gliding silently in a perfect line across the desert. Above them, a massive craft, triangular, dark, with lights along its edges. It wasn't hovering, it was just there, suspended, enormous, impossible. The figures stopped directly in front of me, the light from the craft casting their shadows long across the desert floor. I could feel them before I saw them. Pressure, like the air itself, was compressing against me. My body froze, my breath caught in my throat. Then one of them tilted its head, and I swear I felt a message. Not words, not sound, but a direct, unshakable impression in my mind. Do not look away. I don't know how long I sat there, staring, immobilized. Maybe 30 seconds, maybe 10 minutes. Then, without warning, the figures lifted off the ground and joined the craft. In an instant, they were gone. The truck's engine sputtered back to life. I drove home faster than I've ever driven, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. After that night, I realized this wasn't a random encounter. They were studying, observing light, and perhaps even marking me. I started noticing changes. My sleep patterns were off. My dreams filled with landscapes I had never seen, beings I had never imagined. Sometimes I'd wake with bruises on my arms or shoulders, small burns in circular patterns. I didn't tell anyone. I was afraid I'd be labeled insane. I began researching, digging into local history, newspapers, UFO forums. I discovered that sightings of similar lights and humanoid figures dated back decades in New Mexico, often reported along the same desert corridors I traveled. Witnesses described tall, thin humanoids gliding across the terrain with a grace no human could achieve, always accompanied by lights that pulsed like living things. Sometimes these reports included marks left on the skin, missing time, or inexplicable physical effects. One night, months later, I had an encounter that changed everything. I was driving alone on a gravel road near the old mining shafts outside Roswell. It was pitch black, the moon hidden behind clouds. My headlights caught a figure standing in the middle of the road. Tall, impossibly thin, its head elongated, eyes glowing faintly. I slammed on the brakes, my truck fishtailing in the gravel. The figure didn't move. The air around it shimmered, like heat rising off asphalt in summer. Then, as I watched, two more figures appeared from the shadows, flanking it. The lights above them ignited suddenly, blinding, pulsating, so bright I had to look away. And then I felt it. The most profound, intense awareness I've ever experienced. The beings weren't just observing me. They were inside my mind, reading, analyzing, probing. I saw flashes, visions of my life, moments I had never shared with anyone, fears and regrets, memories I didn't even realize I remembered. I panicked. I tried to start the truck, but my hands were numb. The figures tilted their heads in unison. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, they vanished. No craft, no lights, no figures. Just empty desert and the echo of my own heartbeat. I drove home trembling, unable to comprehend what had happened. From that night on, I knew my life had changed forever. I couldn't drive alone at night, couldn't be outdoors in remote areas, couldn't sleep without lights on. I installed cameras around my apartment, but when I reviewed the footage, it was always static when they appeared. I began keeping a journal, documenting every encounter, every odd sound, every feeling of being watched. Years later, I moved to another state, hoping distance would protect me. It didn't. Sometimes when the sky is clear and the stars shine bright, I see the lights again, distant but unmistakable. The feelings come back, the awareness, the pressure, the certainty that I am still being observed. And I know without doubt that they will return. I don't know why I survived, why they haven't taken me or done more than watch. All I know is that the encounters are real, that they are intelligent, patient, and relentless. And I've come to understand something horrifying. Seeing them once changes you permanently. You can never be the same. Even now, decades later, when I drive through rural areas at night, I check the skies. I scan the fields. I feel the pressure, the awareness. I know they are out there gliding silently, observing, waiting. I don't know what their purpose is. I don't know if they're studying humanity or just curious or something else entirely. But I know they exist. I have seen them with my own eyes. I have felt their attention. And I know that in some way my life will never be my own again. Story the end. It was the summer of 2018 when everything started to feel off. I was 24, freshly out of college, working a seasonal job as a park ranger in a remote section of northern Idaho. The job was supposed to be a dream come true. Long days outdoors, sparse crowds, endless forests, and a paycheck that barely covered rent in a tiny town an hour away. But that summer, the woods had a way of making you feel small, like they were alive in ways you couldn't quite understand. The first encounter happened on a Friday evening. I was patrolling a back trail near Lake Kootenai, a spot that rarely saw visitors past 6 p.m. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the trees, and the lake reflected a molten orange that made it feel like I was walking through a painting. My radio crackled occasionally with other rangers checking in, but I was mostly alone. I liked it that way. About a mile into the trail, I noticed something that made my stomach knot. At first, I thought it was a hiker wearing a dark jacket, standing motionless at the edge of the trail. But as I got closer, I realized there was something wrong. The figure wasn't moving, but it wasn't just standing. It was observing. The posture was rigid, almost unnaturally straight, and the proportions didn't make sense. Its legs seemed too long for the torso, and the head was slightly too big and tilting in a way that made my skin crawl. I stopped walking and called out, "Hello? You need help?" No response. I flicked on my flashlight and trained it on the figure. That's when it moved, not toward me, but like it dissolved into the shadows between the trees, sliding silently. I could see the glint of something in the last rays of the sun, eyes, maybe, reflecting light, but they weren't human. They were larger, almond-shaped, and black as obsidian. I froze. The rational part of my brain tried to tell me it was some hiker playing a joke, maybe wearing a weird suit, but the unease in my chest was overpowering. I fumbled for my radio. "Base, this is Ranger Cole. I think I'm being watched by someone, or something, on Trail 17. Static." Then, finally, a voice. "Cole? Trail 17? Are you just a hiker?" I didn't answer. The figure, or whatever it was, had vanished. I scanned the trees with my flashlight, my heartbeat loud in my ears. The trail was empty, the wind rustling through the pines. I decided to walk back slowly, never turning my back completely. When I got to my ranger cabin that night, I double-checked the locks, though there was no way anyone could have followed me there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I told a few colleagues the next day, but no one took it seriously. "Probably a deer or elk," one joked. "Those shadows play tricks on you." The second encounter was worse. It happened about a week later, late at night. I was doing a night patrol near an old logging road that cut through dense forest. The moon was full, casting eerie silver light across the trees. I had the headlights of the ranger truck on, illuminating a narrow path when I saw a flash of movement at the tree line. At first, I assumed it was a deer. I slowed the truck and scanned the area. Then I saw it, a creature standing upright, at least 7 feet tall, with elongated limbs. Its skin looked grayish and slightly reflective, like wet concrete. It tilted its head at me, and I got the strongest sense of intelligence I've ever felt from an animal, or anything. It was sizing me up, studying me, and that gaze was heavy, suffocating, like it could reach inside my thoughts. I froze. My instincts screamed at me to drive away, but I was rooted to the spot. It stepped forward slowly, deliberately, its movement so smooth it was almost liquid. I could hear nothing but my own breath and the faint creak of branches under its feet. Then it stopped, raised one arm, and pointed. Not at me exactly, but toward the forest behind me. I slammed the truck into reverse and floored it. The road behind me blurred, and I didn't look back until I reached the main highway. When I finally dared to glance in the rearview mirror, nothing was there, just empty forest. That encounter shook me in a way I couldn't explain. I kept a notebook that summer, jotting down times, locations, and descriptions, but I never mentioned it outside the park. People would think I was crazy. But over the next few weeks, I began to notice more signs. My truck's tires were scuffed with unfamiliar marks after night patrols. Occasionally, I'd find footprints near the ranger cabin, long, narrow, with strange indents that didn't match any known animal. They were always gone by morning. One night, around midnight, I was sitting on the porch of the cabin trying to relax with a cup of coffee. The wind was still and the forest seemed unusually quiet. That's when I heard a sound like tapping on wood, very faint at first, then louder. My heart leapt. I grabbed a flashlight and swept the beam across the trees. There it was, standing near the edge of the clearing. It wasn't moving, just watching. Its head turned toward me, and I swear I saw it smile, or at least mimic one. I felt my body lock up. It raised a hand slowly and waved, not aggressively, not threatening, just acknowledging me. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. Just like that, no sound, no trace, only the faint indentation of its feet in the soft earth where it had stood. After that, I started seeing it more frequently. Sometimes it was near the lake, standing in the water, reflecting moonlight. Sometimes it would appear at the edge of the trail during daylight, watching silently, disappearing when approached. I stopped trying to rationalize it. Whatever it wasn't human, and it wasn't like any animal I'd ever seen. Things escalated one night in late August. I was patrolling a remote trail alone, about 5 miles from the cabin. The sun had set an hour ago, and my flashlight cut a narrow cone of light into the darkness. I heard the first noise before I saw anything, a low, humming vibration, almost musical, coming from deep in the trees. It was unlike anything I'd heard in the forest before, not a bird, not a bug. Then I saw it. Standing in the middle of the trail, directly in front of me was the same creature. Its eyes were black and reflective, larger than before. Its body seemed taller, stretching unnaturally. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, like all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I tried to reverse the truck, but it didn't move. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. The humming grew louder, resonating inside my skull. Then it spoke. Not with words, but in my mind, a clear, deliberate communication. Do not follow. Do not come closer. I slammed the truck in park and just stared. The forest felt alive, pressing in on me from all sides. I wanted to run, but my body refused. Then, without warning, it lifted off the ground. Not like a bird, not like any flying animal. It hovered a few feet in the air, then shot backward into the darkness, leaving behind a faint shimmer that faded in seconds. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the truck, flashlight on, scanning the tree line until the first light of dawn. When I finally drove back to the cabin, my hands were raw from gripping the wheel, my mind spinning. The encounters continued sporadically, each more unsettling than the last. I started noticing patterns. The creature or creatures seemed to be drawn to isolated areas, places where humans were rare. I never felt physically threatened, but the psychological impact was profound. I began having vivid dreams of the encounters, each one more intense. In these dreams, the creature would watch me, sometimes mimicking human gestures, sometimes contorting into impossible shapes. I would wake drenched in sweat, convinced I had heard a sound in the real forest outside. By the end of September, I couldn't handle it anymore. The last straw came when I was patrolling near an abandoned logging cabin deep in the forest. The trail was overgrown and the air was thick with fog. I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, matching my pace exactly. Every time I turned around, nothing was there. Then I saw a shape in the fog, tall, gray, with long limbs. I froze. It didn't approach. Instead, it began moving parallel to me, keeping its distance but always visible in the corner of my eye. I could feel its awareness, like a presence pressing against my consciousness. I had to get out of there. I spun the truck around and drove like a maniac, the fog swirling, headlights barely cutting through. When I reached the main highway, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The fog was clearing and the forest looked normal. No creature, no shimmer, nothing to suggest I hadn't imagined it. After that night, I quit my job. I didn't tell anyone why, just said the remote work wasn't for me. I moved back to a city where lights and people and traffic made me feel safe again. But the encounters didn't leave me entirely. Even now, years later, I catch glimpses of something strange in shadows, in reflections, in dreams. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear that same low hum echoing from the dark. I know what I saw was real. I know it wasn't a human, a deer, or a trick of the light. I don't know if it was alien, interdimensional, or something older than humanity itself. All I know is that it watched me, studied me, and sometimes still does. People ask me if I believe in aliens, and I used to laugh. Now I only nod and say, I've seen one. Every encounter was a reminder of how small we are, how fleeting, and how little we understand about the world around us. It's easy to dismiss stories like mine, but the forest doesn't lie. The shadows don't lie. And whatever I encountered that summer of 2018, it is still out there, waiting, watching, just beyond the reach of the light. Story the end. It was mid-September when the incident began, and the nights had already started to stretch longer over the hills of central Pennsylvania. I'd been working late at the university lab for a research project I was finishing on nocturnal animal behavior, mostly tracking bats and raccoons, recording their movement patterns, and tagging a few for study. I was a graduate student, living alone in a small weathered cabin I rented a few miles from campus. The cabin sat on the edge of a dense forest that stretched back for miles, broken only by the occasional logging road or creek. I didn't mind the isolation. In fact, I preferred it, and my research thrived in that quiet solitude. The first night I noticed something was wrong. It wasn't obvious. I had returned from tagging a bat near a clearing about 2 miles down a dirt path. The sky was clear, a crescent moon cutting across a velvet black sky, and the forest was alive with the familiar symphony of nocturnal creatures. As I walked back, headlamp scanning the path, I thought I saw something move just past the tree line. Something tall, but my mind immediately rationalized it. Deer, maybe a lanky stray dog. I reached the cabin, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. Everything seemed normal. My laptop hummed on the desk, the small heater cast a warm orange glow, and the faint smell of coffee lingered from earlier. I didn't think much of the movement outside until I went to check the trail camera I had set up near the clearing. The battery had drained overnight, something that was unusual for a new set of batteries. I replaced them, set the camera, and tried to shake off the creeping unease that had settled in the back of my mind. The following night, I was again out in the forest, recording data and tracking the tagged animals. Around midnight, when I reached the clearing, the wind died suddenly. It wasn't common for the forest to feel eerily still at night, but this was different. The silence wasn't just absence of sound. It was heavy, oppressive, as if the forest was holding its breath. I froze mid-step and scanned the tree line. A faint shimmer in the moonlight caught my eye, and I thought I saw a figure, tall, unnaturally thin, standing just beyond the trees. I called out softly, thinking maybe a hiker or a camper had wandered off the main path. Nothing. The figure didn't move. I thought my mind was playing tricks, my brain running wild with isolation and the dark. I forced myself to laugh quietly and began to pack up my equipment. But the feeling followed me back to the cabin, the sensation of being watched, of not being alone. It escalated quickly after that. 2 nights later, I was in the lab at 1 a.m., reviewing footage from my cameras. One camera, the one facing the far edge of the clearing, showed something I couldn't explain. A tall, thin shadow appeared in the frame, moving slowly from left to right, almost floating. Its proportions were wrong. Too long, limbs bending in ways they shouldn't. I paused the video, zoomed in, enhanced the contrast. My stomach dropped. It had no visible features, no face, no hair, just darkness where features should have been. I tried to rationalize it. Light distortion, camera error, maybe a deer caught mid-leap. But then I noticed something worse. It wasn't just moving, it was watching. The figure's head turned ever so slightly, almost imperceptibly, following the camera's direction as if it knew I was watching. My hands shook as I shut the laptop and sat back, heart pounding. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, made me jump. Around 3 a.m., I thought I heard something tapping on the window. My cabin had only one window in the front, and when I peeked through the blinds, nothing was there. Just the empty yard and the whispering trees. I stayed awake until dawn, convinced I had imagined it all, but that gnawing feeling wouldn't leave. By the 3rd week, I started noticing marks on the cabin, faint scratches along the siding, almost invisible unless you were looking closely. They weren't from any animal I knew, and the pattern was too deliberate to be random. One night, I even found footprints in the dirt near the back porch, long, narrow, humanoid, but disproportionate, like the feet of someone or something, twice as tall as a normal man. My first instinct was fear, pure, raw fear, but a part of me was mesmerized. I started documenting everything, footprints, scratches, shadows on the cameras. My obsession took over. Then came the close encounter. It was a Saturday night, and I had just returned from a late tagging session. I was tired, careless, and decided to take a shortcut through the logging road that ran behind my cabin. The road was barely wide enough for one car, bordered by trees so thick you couldn't see the forest floor in places. Halfway down the road, my headlights caught something standing in the middle of the path. I froze. At first, I thought it was a hiker, but the shape didn't match any human. It was taller than the tallest man I'd ever seen, easily 8 feet, with limbs so long they seemed to scrape the ground. Its skin, or what I could see of it, was a pale reflective gray, almost like wet concrete. I gunned the engine, ready to swerve, but it moved with a speed that defied logic, sidestepping with unnatural agility, never leaving the road. I slammed the car into reverse, heart hammering, and it mirrored my movements, keeping pace with the vehicle. I could feel the intelligence in its gaze, even through the darkness, some sinister awareness. I reached the cabin's driveway and bolted inside, locking every door and window. My chest heaved, mind racing, adrenaline surging. I told myself it was a trick of light, a hallucination, but deep down, I knew it was real. The following days were a blur of terror and paranoia. Every time I left the cabin, I saw it, or something like it, moving just beyond the tree line. It seemed to study me, learn my patterns. I started to notice other things. Small objects in my cabin were slightly moved, the faint smell of sulfur and wet earth lingering even when I cleaned. One night, I woke to the sound of whispering outside the cabin. Low, guttural, unintelligible, but unmistakably deliberate. Then came the night that changed everything. I was sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing footage from my trail cameras, when the power went out. The cabin was plunged into darkness. My phone had no signal, and the wind outside had picked up, howling through the trees. I lit a candle and sat frozen, listening. That's when I heard it, a slow, deliberate knock on the cabin door. 1, 2, 3. Each tap measured deliberate. My stomach dropped, and I realized I hadn't seen anyone approach. I grabbed a flashlight, hands shaking, and peeked through the blinds. The yard was empty. I stepped to the door, slowly turned the lock, and swung it open. Nothing. Just the empty porch, leaves rustling in the wind. Then I noticed the footprints again. They led up to the porch and stopped, not a single mark returning into the woods. I stepped outside, heart racing, shining the flashlight around. That's when I heard it, a faint, high-pitched hum, like static but with rhythm. It came from the trees, circling me. I felt eyes on me, dozens of them, though I couldn't see a thing. I retreated into the cabin, barricaded myself inside, and tried to sleep. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a sound behind me, a scraping, slow, deliberate, like fingernails on wood. The kitchen wall, the one behind me, had scratches, deep grooves now etched into the paint. I turned on the flashlight, and for a brief second I saw it. Pressed against the other side of the wall, taller than the ceiling, featureless face inches from mine, limbs bending in impossible angles. Then it was gone. Just gone. My candle had burned out, leaving me in darkness. I didn't leave the cabin for 3 days. When I finally did, I found the forest changed. Branches seemed bent away from certain paths, the ground uneven, as if whatever had been watching me had moved through the area deliberately, marking trails I hadn't noticed before. My cameras recorded nothing, but I felt its presence constantly, lurking, patient. I tried to talk to people, colleagues, anyone who might believe me. Most laughed it off. Stress, isolation, imagination. I knew better. I even tried inviting friends out to the cabin during the day, but they felt it too, the oppressive weight of being watched. Even in sunlight, the forest seemed alive in ways it shouldn't be. Months passed. The sightings grew less frequent, but the feeling never left. I moved back into town for a few weeks, hoping distance would break the cycle. But one night, while driving past the edge of the forest, I saw it standing on the road, distant, tall, limbs unnaturally long, just watching. It didn't move when I approached, didn't retreat, it just stared. And I realized it was patient. It didn't need to chase me. It knew where I lived and it could wait. I've stopped sleeping in the cabin. I've tried to ignore it, focus on my studies, but the footage, the marks, the shadows, they haunt me. I've become hyper-aware of movement in the dark, sounds in the wind, even the pattern of tree branches. I can't shake the feeling that whatever it is, it's still out there, waiting, watching. And every night, when the wind rustles through the treetops, I hear it, the faint, high-pitched hum, just beyond the edge of vision, just outside the safety of my lights. I know people will call me crazy. They'll say it was stress, isolation, imagination run wild. But I know what I saw. I know what followed me. I know the things that move just beyond the reach of human understanding, and the things that can wait, patient and silent, until they choose to make themselves known. And I know that one day they will. Even now, months later, I can't drive past the edge of that forest without my stomach tightening, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I can't walk alone at night, and I don't go camping anymore. But the worst part is knowing it hasn't gone away. It's still there, somewhere between the trees, stretching across the shadows, watching the trails I used to walk. Waiting. And maybe if I'm careless, it will follow me home. The footage I captured, the scratches on the cabin, the footprints, they remain locked away, evidence of a truth people won't believe. I've shared pieces with colleagues, cautiously, in whispers, and they laughed, excused it. But I know what I saw, and I know it's not unique. Others have reported sightings, shadows too tall, movements too fast, shapes that defy anatomy. I found a forum online, a network of people claiming encounters with similar entities, intelligent, patient, silent observers of our world. None of us have answers. None of us have relief. The encounter changed me. I'm constantly alert, my life reduced to avoidance and vigilance. Friends ask why I never go out at night, why I don't visit the cabin, why I don't spend time alone in the woods. I tell them it's personal preference that I prefer city life, safety in numbers. But the truth is, I know what waits in the forest. I know the thing that can move silently across 8 feet of forest floor in a heartbeat, that can press its featureless face against a wall and vanish in a second. I know it watches, and I know it can wait. Sometimes late at night I drive past that road again, just to make sure. And sometimes I see it, standing there like a shadow against the trees. Watching the headlights pass, it doesn't move, it doesn't run, it doesn't flee. It just observes, patient and silent, knowing I've seen it and that it knows I can't forget. I will never go back to that cabin. I will never walk those trails at night, and yet I can't escape it. The image of its height, its limbs, its featureless face pressed against my wall haunts me every night. It is a reminder that there are things beyond our understanding, things that do not need to attack to terrify. Its presence alone is enough. I don't know what it wants, or why it watches, or how long it has been there, but I know one thing: I will never be alone in the forest again. I will never forget its patience, its intelligence, the sheer impossibility of its form. And every night, when the wind rustles through the trees, I hear it again. The low, high-pitched hum that follows me wherever I go, because it isn't just in the forest anymore. It's in my mind. It waits, and it watches. Story, the end. It was a quiet Thursday evening in late October when Mark Reynolds decided to take a detour through the back roads outside of Roswell, New Mexico. He had been driving all day from Albuquerque, the sun just dipping below the horizon, casting an orange hue across the flat, open landscape. He liked the solitude of the desert, the way it made the world feel distant, almost suspended in time. That night, the air was cool but dry, the kind of crisp desert air that makes your skin tingle and your mind sharpen. Mark's car hummed along the cracked asphalt, headlights cutting through the creeping darkness. He wasn't expecting anything unusual. He had always been interested in UFO lore, of course. He had read every book, watched every documentary, and even driven past the International UFO Museum countless times. But he'd never experienced anything firsthand. He considered himself a skeptic, a realist, someone who needed evidence before jumping to wild conclusions. That skepticism would be challenged tonight in ways he could never have imagined. The road curved sharply, and Mark slowed as he spotted a small diner on the side of the highway. It was the kind of place that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 70s. Neon lights flickering, a few rusting cars parked outside, and the faint smell of grease and coffee drifting into the night air. He decided to stop, not out of hunger, but just to stretch his legs and shake off the monotony of driving. Inside, the diner was almost empty, save for an elderly man seated at the counter, nursing a cup of coffee. The man looked up as Mark entered, giving him a small nod. "Evening," he said, his voice gravely. "Not much out here tonight." Mark smiled politely and ordered a coffee. The waitress, a woman in her 40s with a tired but kind face, set the cup down in front of him. "Long drive?" she asked. "Yeah, Albuquerque to Roswell, trying to see some of the country before it gets too dark." She nodded. "Watch the skies?" she said cryptically, then shuffled off to the other end of the diner. Mark chuckled to himself, thinking it was just a joke about the UFO obsession around Roswell. But he made a mental note to keep his eyes open once he got back on the road. He finished his coffee, paid, and stepped back into the car. The night had grown darker, the stars beginning to glimmer faintly. He started the engine, taking the road south toward a more remote stretch that led deeper into the desert. It was around 10:30 p.m. when he noticed the first unusual thing. The moon had risen fully now, casting a cold silver glow over the landscape, and the air was unnaturally still. No wind rustled the scrub brush, no distant coyote howled. The silence was oppressive, the kind of silence that made you hyper-aware of every small sound. And then he saw it, a bright light hovering above the horizon, moving in a way that no airplane could. At first, he thought it was a helicopter, but as he watched, the light darted sideways, stopped abruptly, then shot upward at an impossible speed. His stomach tightened. This was no ordinary aircraft. He slowed the car, trying to get a better look. The light pulsed, almost rhythmically, like it was alive. Then, as he blinked, it vanished. Mark rubbed his eyes and shook his head. "Get a grip, man," he muttered aloud. But a part of him, a part he didn't like to admit, felt an icy fear curling in his chest. He continued driving, keeping his eyes glued to the sky. That's when the power went out. All of it. Headlights, dashboard lights, even his cell phone flickered and died at the same time. He slammed on the brakes, heart pounding. His car sat in the darkness, engine humming faintly, as if it were suspended in a void. And then he heard it, a low, humming sound, almost musical, vibrating through the car itself. He couldn't tell if it was outside or inside, but it was undeniably real. The hairs on his arms stood on end. His rational mind scrambled for an explanation. Transformers, radio interference, some freak desert phenomenon. But nothing in his life had prepared him for what came next. A figure appeared in the middle of the road. Not a human figure. Tall, unnaturally thin, with limbs that seemed too long and a head that glowed faintly, like it was emitting its own light. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes were impossibly large, black and reflective. Mark's instincts screamed at him to run, but his body froze. The figure didn't move toward him. It just stood there, staring. The humming grew louder, filling his head with vibrations that made it hard to think. His chest tightened, breath coming in short, shallow bursts. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. Mark slammed the car into gear and floored the accelerator, tires squealing against the asphalt. His mind raced. Maybe it was a hallucination. He had been driving all day, after all. But deep down, he knew what he had seen was real. He didn't stop until he reached a gas station 10 miles down the road. The lights were on, the pumps busy, and the normal hum of electricity felt almost comforting. He parked, heart still racing, and ran inside. "Hey," he said to the attendant, a young guy with a baseball cap, "did you see anything strange on the road tonight?" The guy looked at him like he'd grown a second head. "Nope," he said, "just the usual desert traffic." "Why?" Mark hesitated. I don't know. Thought I saw something. Something weird." The attendant shrugged. "Desert gets weird sometimes. Don't let it spook you." But Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Even inside the bright, fluorescent-lit gas station, every shadow seemed deeper, every sound amplified. He bought a bottle of water, forced himself to drink, and then got back in the car. The rest of the drive to Roswell was tense. Every light in the sky, every movement on the side of the road made him flinch. By the time he reached the city, he was exhausted, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He checked into a small motel, telling himself he would sleep, but the images of that figure haunted him. That night, he dreamed of the desert. Or maybe it wasn't a dream. He was standing alone in the empty darkness, the sky swirling with light. The figure appeared again, but this time there were more, dozens, maybe hundreds, moving in ways that defied physics. They didn't speak, but he felt them communicating, an overwhelming presence in his mind. Panic surged, but he couldn't move, couldn't scream. When he woke, the sun was just beginning to rise. He was drenched in sweat, shaking, heart still hammering. He tried to rationalize it as a nightmare, a stress-induced hallucination. But as he reached for his phone to call a friend, he noticed something strange. Scratches on the dashboard of his car. Long, thin gouges, not there before, etched into the metal. Mark froze. That wasn't in the dream. That was real. He spent the next few days in Roswell, trying to convince himself it was an isolated incident, maybe an elaborate prank, maybe even a mass hallucination. But the more he read, the more he realized he wasn't alone. There were countless reports, many from decades past, of lights in the sky, missing time, unexplained encounters, and they all sounded eerily familiar. Then, on the third night, it happened again. He was walking back to his motel from a small diner, the streets nearly deserted. A light appeared above him, bright and white, pulsating. The humming returned, low and omnipresent, and before he could react, the air around him seemed to distort. He felt himself being pulled, gently at first, then with increasing force, toward the light. Everything went white. When he woke, he was lying in the desert, several miles from the city, his car nowhere in sight. The sun was high, scorching. He was disoriented, dehydrated, and panicking. His cell phone had a weak signal, and when he called, his friend on the other end could barely understand him, their voice breaking with static. He tried to piece together what had happened. Had he been abducted? It sounded insane, even to him. But he knew he hadn't imagined the figure, the lights, the sensation of being lifted. And then he noticed the time. 4 hours were missing from his memory. 4 hours unaccounted for, which didn't add up with the brief time he had been walking. Over the next few weeks, he noticed changes in himself. He couldn't sleep properly. Dreams plagued him, visions of the figures, of lights, of floating through the sky. He became obsessed, poring over reports, tracking sightings, reading testimonies from people who claimed to have been taken. He even joined a few UFO research forums, connecting with others who had similar experiences. One night, while scrolling through an old database of close encounters, he found a report that made his blood run cold. It described an abduction in the same area, decades ago, with details that matched his own experience almost perfectly. Missing time, lights in the sky, a feeling of being watched, and strange markings on the vehicle. But there was one detail that froze him. The witness had reported that the entities had the ability to implant something in their subjects, something they would carry for life. Mark's heart raced. Could it be him? He examined himself carefully, looking for anything unusual, but found nothing, at least nothing visible. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't entirely alone. Months passed. Mark's life began to fracture under the weight of what had happened. Friends noticed he was distant, paranoid, obsessively focused on the skies. He changed jobs, moved to a different city, but the incidents continued. Lights appeared when he least expected, shadows moved unnaturally, and sometimes when he was alone, he could feel a presence just out of sight. Then, one night, while camping in the mountains of Colorado, hoping the distance and altitude would give him peace, he saw them again. The figures hovered above the treetops, silent, their black eyes fixed on him. The humming returned, vibrating through the very bones of his body. He tried to run, but his body wouldn't obey, trapped in a paralyzing fear he had never felt before. And then he heard a voice, not out loud, but in his mind. "We are always with you." Mark screamed, finally breaking free of the paralysis, and ran blindly through the forest. When he returned to his car hours later, it was as if the night had never happened, but he knew it had. They were out there, always watching, always waiting, and he would never truly escape them. Even now, years later, he can feel it. The brush of their presence when he steps outside at night, the way the shadows seem too deep, the occasional flicker of light in the corner of his vision. He has tried to forget, to rationalize, to convince himself that it was all imagination. But he knows the truth. Some encounters are real, and some of them follow you forever. Mark never returned to the desert. He never drove those back roads again. But at night, lying in his bed in his small apartment in the Midwest, he sometimes sees a faint glow outside his window, and he knows without a doubt that they are still there, watching, waiting. He has learned one thing: you can run from 1,000 miles of road, from cities and forests and mountains, but some things never let you go. Story the end. It was the summer of 2016 when my life took a turn I could never have anticipated. I was 22, freshly out of college, and I had taken a job as a seasonal fire lookout in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State. The job was supposed to be temporary, just a few months of solitude, clear air, and endless vistas of trees and sky. I had always loved being alone in the wilderness, the kind of isolation that lets you hear your own heartbeat over everything else. But that summer, I found out there's a difference between solitude and being truly, unknowably alone. My first week on the job was standard. I'd climb the rickety stairs to the old wooden tower each morning, sweep the horizon with my binoculars, and record any signs of smoke or fire. Nights were quiet, except for the usual wildlife, the calls of owls, the rustle of deer in the underbrush, the distant howl of coyotes. But around the end of the first week, things started to feel off. It began with the shadows. Even in the middle of the day, I'd catch movement in the trees at the edges of my vision. Movement that didn't belong to anything I could identify. It wasn't a deer or a bird. It was too large, too deliberate. At first, I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light or my imagination playing on the loneliness, but the feeling never left me. The first real encounter happened on a Thursday evening. I was sitting at my little wooden desk, logging the day's observations, when I noticed a flicker out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was the sun reflecting off a branch, but then I saw it. A figure standing at the base of the tower, about 50 feet away. I froze. The figure was tall, well over 6 feet, and thin, almost gaunt. Its posture was unnatural, rigid in a way that didn't belong to a human. The air seemed to shift around it, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I fumbled for my binoculars and trained them on the figure. That's when my stomach dropped. Its head was enormous, too large for its body, and its eyes reflected light in a way I've never seen in any animal or human. They were pitch black, glossy, and unblinking. I swallowed hard and tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure didn't move at first, just watched. Then, slowly, it began to move toward the tower, but not like a human. Its movements were fluid and impossibly fast. My mind screamed at me to get inside, but I was rooted to the spot, my legs heavy and unresponsive. By the time I forced myself to climb the stairs, the figure was gone, nothing but the trees swaying gently in the wind. I spent the rest of the night on edge. Every creak of the tower, every snap of a branch made me flinch. Sleep didn't come. When morning finally arrived, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was a prank by some other lookout or a hiker playing dress-up. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Over the next 2 weeks, sightings became more frequent, always at the edges of my vision, always just far enough to be noticed but not close enough to touch. Sometimes I'd see the eyes reflecting in the moonlight while I patrolled the ridge trails. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night to find shadows moving below the tower, circling silently, always watching. I began to keep a journal, recording the times, locations, and descriptions. I didn't tell anyone. People would call me crazy, but I needed a way to convince myself this was real. Then came the night that made me seriously question my sanity. It was August 14th. The air was unusually still, heavy with the scent of pine and smoke from distant fires. I had just finished my evening check and was about to climb into my sleeping bag when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping on the wooden railing outside the tower. My stomach clenched. No wind could make that sound. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it out the window. Nothing. Then I saw movement in the trees below. A figure emerged, taller than any human, with limbs too long, skin that seemed to shimmer faintly in the flashlight beam. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle as it stared up at me, and then, slowly, it lifted one arm and pointed. Not at me, but at the forest behind the tower. I didn't wait to understand. I grabbed my radio and called the base. Base, this is Ranger Cole. I need immediate assistance. There's something down here. I don't know what it is, but it's not human. Static. Finally, a voice broke through. Cole, are you sure you're all right? I wanted to scream. No, I'm not all right. There's something is here, watching me. The line went dead. I don't know if it was a technical glitch or if someone cut the channel. By the time I forced myself to look again, the figure was gone. The forest was empty, silent, normal. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the tower, flashlight in hand, scanning the tree line until the first light of dawn. By then, I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the flashlight. I began to wonder if I had made a mistake coming here, if I had wandered too far into a place humans weren't meant to be. The encounters didn't stop. By late August, I started seeing the figure or figures during the day. Sometimes they were partially obscured by trees blending perfectly with the forest, but I could always tell when they were watching. Other times I'd glimpse a tall gray shape standing in the middle of a clearing, motionless, its head tilted as if curious. Once, while hiking a ridge trail, I swear I saw one of them leap from a tree to the ground in a single impossible motion, landing silently 20 feet away. Sleep became impossible. I started having dreams that felt more real than reality. In these dreams, the creatures were always there, watching me, sometimes mimicking my movements, sometimes twisting into forms that defied description. I would wake sweating, heart racing, and hear soft, distant tapping on the tower or rustling just outside. I began documenting every detail: shape, size, location, movement patterns. I noticed they always appeared near isolated areas, always observing from the edges, never engaging directly. But the psychological weight was immense. I couldn't eat properly. I couldn't sleep. I felt the constant suffocating gaze, even when I was deep in the city during a brief trip to resupply. On the night of September 3rd, I encountered something that changed everything. I had been patrolling the far end of the trail, near an abandoned logging camp when I saw movement ahead. A figure, standing perfectly still, completely black against the trees. I stopped. My flashlight illuminated it. It was taller than I had ever seen, thin, almost skeletal, with limbs that seemed too long. Its head was enormous and featureless, except for those black, glossy eyes. Then the forest fell silent. No wind, no insects, no distant animals, just the sound of my own breathing. And the figure began to move, not toward me, not away. Sideways, moving with a fluidity that made my mind scream. And then it started humming, low at first, then rising in pitch, resonating through my skull. It wasn't a sound I could have made, or any human could have made. It was something ancient, something aware. I froze, the humming intensified, vibrating in my chest, in my bones. And then, clearly, inside my mind came the words, "Do not follow. Do not come closer." I couldn't move. I couldn't think. My body refused all commands. And then, in an instant, it vanished. No shimmer, no trace, nothing, just empty forest and a lingering hum fading into the distance. I left that area the next morning. I resigned from the lookout position, citing personal reasons. I couldn't stay in that forest. I couldn't endure the constant presence, the impossible observation, the sense that I was being studied by something not of this world. Years later, I still carry that summer with me. I don't talk about it much. People ask me if I believe in aliens, and I just nod quietly, because I have seen them. I have felt their awareness, their gaze, their intelligence. They were never violent, but the encounter left scars deeper than any physical wound. I've read reports, stories of people in remote areas seeing figures, hearing unexplainable sounds, witnessing impossible movements. I know what I saw wasn't a trick of the mind or a forest anomaly. It was real. And whatever it was, it's still out there, watching, waiting. Even now, I sometimes wake at night to the sound of tapping or the low hum, and sometimes in the corner of my eye, I catch a shadow that seems too tall, too fluid, too aware. And I remember that summer in the Cascades, and I know that the world is far bigger and far stranger than we allow ourselves to believe. Story, the end. It started on a late summer evening in upstate New York, just outside the small town of Delhi. I was working as a field researcher for a wildlife conservation project, tracking migratory patterns of deer and elk in the Catskill Mountains. I loved the solitude, the quiet nights spent in the woods with only my camera and notebook for company. The forest stretched endlessly around my small cabin, dense with oaks and maples, their leaves beginning to turn with the first hints of fall. I had been in the cabin for 2 weeks when it happened, a week into my nightly excursions. On this particular night, I was returning from a tagging session along a ridge that overlooked the valley. The sky was unusually clear, stars glinting in sharp clusters. I remember pausing for a moment at the crest of the hill, taking in the view. The moonlight shimmered on the river far below, the trees casting long, stretching shadows. That's when I first noticed it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe a deer standing unusually still at the edge of the clearing. But the outline was wrong. The figure was tall, far taller than any human or deer I had ever seen, and unnaturally slender, with elongated limbs that bent slightly at angles that should have been impossible. It seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, almost translucent, and I had the sudden, chilling sensation that it wasn't just standing there. It was waiting, watching me. I froze for several long seconds, unsure whether to run or stay. Finally, my instincts kicked in, and I picked up my pace down the dirt path to my cabin. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, maybe fatigue playing tricks on me, but the feeling of being watched stayed with me, even as the trees swallowed the figure from view. The next night, I took a longer route through the forest, hoping to avoid the area where I had seen it. Around 11 p.m., I noticed unusual sounds, low, guttural noises that didn't match any animal I knew. At first, I assumed it was a fox or raccoon, but the sounds were too deliberate, almost conversational in rhythm, though entirely incomprehensible. My chest tightened as I realized they were coming from multiple directions at once. The hairs on my neck stood on end. I reached the clearing near my cabin and set up my trail cameras, hoping to capture evidence of the creature. For a long while, nothing appeared on the monitors except the usual nocturnal wildlife: deer, rabbits, a fox passing once or twice. But then, near the edge of the frame, a shadow moved differently. It was tall, thin, walking upright, with limbs swinging in a way that defied human biomechanics. My stomach dropped when it turned toward the camera, its head tilting unnaturally, almost as if it knew I was watching. I tried to rationalize it, the wind blowing a tarp, a trick of light, my imagination, but the footage was unambiguous. The shadow paused, lifted a limb in a way that was almost deliberate, then vanished. I shut down the monitors and sat in silence, listening to the forest. I could hear faint rustling just beyond the range of my flashlight. Something was moving, always just out of sight, and it was aware of me. Over the next several nights, sightings increased. I would leave the cabin to check cameras, and in the corner of my vision, I would catch movement. Too tall, too fast, slipping through the trees like a shadow. The sounds came closer now, low, wet, and deliberate. I began sleeping with the lights on and the door locked, but I could hear something scratching outside, moving along the walls of the cabin. I thought it was a raccoon or some animal, but the scratching was precise, too controlled to be accidental. One night I had my closest encounter yet. I had gone back to the ridge to record nocturnal sounds, carrying only my recorder and flashlight. As I stood in the clearing, I felt a pressure in the air, an unnatural stillness that made every hair on my body bristle. Then I saw it, a silhouette emerging from the tree line. Its limbs were impossibly long, and its head was tilted slightly forward, as though it were studying me. I froze. My flashlight beam wavered as my hands shook uncontrollably. The figure didn't run or flee. It moved slowly, with deliberate grace, stepping between the trees without breaking a single branch or rustling a single leaf. It was observing, calculating, patient. I realized then that it was intelligent, aware of my presence in a way that was impossible for a normal animal. I tried to retreat, slowly backing toward my vehicle, but the figure mirrored my movements, maintaining distance, but never allowing me to feel safe. My heart pounded, my breath ragged, and I knew if I ran, I would be too fast for my own instincts. I made it to the edge of the ridge where the ground sloped toward the road, and the figure halted at the tree line, watching until I was out of sight. After that night, the encounters became more aggressive, though still cautious. I began finding footprints near the cabin, long, narrow, with elongated toes and fingers. They appeared to come from the forest, approach the porch, and then disappear into the underbrush. My cameras captured brief flashes of movement, too quick to see clearly, but unmistakably humanoid, impossibly tall, and impossible to classify. One evening, I was sitting in the cabin reviewing footage when I noticed something even more disturbing. On the monitor, one camera had captured a shadow pressing against the outside of the cabin wall. Its limbs stretched impossibly, wrapping around the corner of the building as though testing the structure. I paused the video, enhanced the image, and saw it. A featureless head, smooth and pale, with no discernible eyes or mouth, tilted toward the camera. Then it vanished. I could no longer ignore what was happening. I started documenting everything meticulously: scratch marks, footprints, video evidence, audio recordings of the strange sounds. But the more I documented, the closer it seemed to come. It was almost as if it knew I was tracking it. One night, I woke to a low hum outside the cabin, vibrating through the floorboards. I sat up, heart racing, and saw movement outside the window. A tall, shadowy figure pressed against the glass, limbs bending unnaturally, head tilted in an impossible angle. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. It was studying me. In desperation, I reached out to local authorities, hoping someone could make sense of it. They dismissed me, attributing my experiences to isolation, fatigue, and overactive imagination. Even wildlife experts suggested I was seeing misidentified animals, though they admitted no known species could match the descriptions or behavior I reported. The turning point came one night when I decided to leave the cabin and drive into town. As I navigated the winding dirt roads, I noticed something moving in the distance. A towering figure, standing perfectly still on the side of the road. My headlights illuminated it for a brief moment. Its proportions were impossible. Limbs long and thin, head unnervingly smooth and featureless. I pressed the accelerator, but when I looked in the rearview mirror, it seemed to follow, gliding along the tree line with unnatural speed. By the time I reached the safety of the town, I was shaking, covered in cold sweat. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried to convince myself it was over, that leaving the forest would end the encounters. But weeks later, I saw it again, standing silently at the edge of the road as I drove home from a store. It didn't move, didn't approach, but its presence was unmistakable. It was patient, it was intelligent, and it knew I had seen it. I have since moved back into town permanently. I sold the cabin, left the forest behind, but the memories remain. Sometimes, when driving late at night, I think I see it standing just beyond the headlights, tall, silent, watching. The sensation of being observed never leaves. I check the mirrors obsessively, glance at shadows in the corner of my vision, and every rustle in the night makes me tense. I've spoken to others online who claim to have had similar experiences in isolated forests, mountains, or rural areas across the country. They describe the same features: impossible height, long limbs, featureless faces, deliberate and intelligent observation. None have answers, and none can explain why these entities appear or what they want. The experience changed me fundamentally. I'm hyper-aware of my surroundings, suspicious of shadows and noises, constantly vigilant when alone. I avoid the woods entirely and rarely drive on rural roads at night. Sleep is difficult, and dreams often feature tall, silent shapes pressing against walls or standing just at the edge of vision. I have attempted to record encounters since moving back, setting up cameras in my yard and along nearby trails. Occasionally, footage reveals fleeting shapes, too fast to identify, too unnatural to dismiss. Audio captures low, vibrating hums or clicks impossible to attribute to any known animal. Each time I feel the same oppressive awareness, the same sense that I am being watched by an intelligence beyond comprehension. I've considered seeking help from paranormal researchers, but I hesitate. Most assume I am exaggerating or imagine they might not be able to help. There is no clear explanation for what I experienced, no one to verify it. The thought that it exists and watches from the shadows, patient and silent, is terrifying enough. In quiet moments, I imagine the forest where it first appeared. The trees, the trails, the ridges and clearings, all of it remains untouched by human perception, but perhaps fully observed by something else, something that does not need to hunt or attack to dominate. Its presence alone is enough to instill fear. It taught me that there are things in the world beyond comprehension, outside the scope of science or reason, things that watch silently and patiently, waiting for the right moment. I sometimes catch myself scanning shadows in the city, half expecting to see its elongated form slip between buildings. My friends joke about my paranoia, but I know the truth. It does not need to be near to influence fear to make one aware of its intelligence and patience. I carry that awareness with me now in every isolated moment, every darkened path, every stretch of road at night. I do not sleep as I once did. I do not walk alone. And though I am surrounded by the lights and noise of civilization, the memory of that night, the ridge, the clearing, and the tall, impossibly thin figure is as vivid as ever. It follows me in memory, in sensation, in the quietest hours before dawn. I have no answers, no closure, only the knowledge that I was seen, studied, and remembered by something utterly beyond human understanding. I am careful now, hypervigilant, and cautious of the woods even miles away. I keep my doors locked, lights on, and sleep with a small flashlight by my side. I cannot erase the memory of its face, or rather, the absence of it, the smooth, featureless surface pressed toward me through the cabin wall. I cannot ignore the way it moved, gliding across uneven ground without making a sound, limbs bending in ways no human limb should. And I know it is patient. I have shared what I experienced with a few trusted colleagues, but the reactions are uniform: skepticism, disbelief, rationalization. Even when shown video or photographs, the evidence is inconclusive, fleeting, impossible to verify fully. Yet I remember everything. The smell of wet earth, the cold pressure of the air when it was near, the sense of eyes observing me from the dark. It has been months since I first saw it clearly, but the awareness persists. Every wind through the trees, every shadow shifting at the edge of vision, every strange noise at night reminds me that it is still there, watching, waiting, patient, intelligent. I will never return to that forest. I will never set foot on those trails alone again. And yet, the memory is with me always, inescapable, like a shadow at the edge of perception. I know it is out there, somewhere between trees, ridges, and clearings, silent and patient, waiting for the day it chooses to show itself fully again. And I know that when it does, there will be no escaping it. Story, the end. It was a late summer evening in rural Utah when James Callahan decided to take a drive. He had been cooped up in Salt Lake City all week, dealing with work deadlines and the relentless buzz of city life. The heat of the day had finally faded into a crisp desert night, and James found himself craving the quiet, the wide open spaces where he could just breathe. He packed a small bag, threw it into the trunk, and headed east toward the back roads that led into the isolated stretches of desert beyond Heber City. The first hour was uneventful. His car hummed steadily as he drove, headlights slicing through the darkness. The landscape was stark. Red rock formations, scattered sagebrush, and the occasional abandoned farmstead. The kind of emptiness that made you feel both free and incredibly small. James liked it. He liked the solitude, the sense that for a few hours he was completely alone with the world. By the time he turned off onto a narrow, unpaved road leading deeper into the wilderness, the sky had darkened into a velvety black. Stars blazed overhead, brilliant and countless, a sight he hadn't seen in months due to city lights. James smiled and slowed the car, savoring the peace. That's when he first noticed something strange. A faint light hovering above a distant ridge, too low and too still to be a plane. He squinted, trying to make sense of it. At first, he thought it might be a reflection from a radio tower, but as he watched, the light shifted sideways, moving with a speed and precision that made his stomach tighten. It wasn't a plane or a helicopter or anything he'd ever seen. His rational mind tried to insist it was a drone or some prank, but a sense of unease began to creep into him. He kept driving, hoping the sensation would fade, but it didn't. Instead, the light seemed to follow him, maintaining a perfect distance, always visible on the horizon, sometimes blinking, sometimes steady. After another 30 minutes, James realized the light had grown larger, brighter. He stopped the car, heart hammering, and stepped out. The desert was quiet, eerily so. The only sound was the distant rustle of dry brush in the wind. He turned in a full circle, scanning the sky, and then he saw it, something he could barely comprehend. A massive, saucer-shaped craft hovered silently, maybe a few hundred feet above the ground. It was metallic, smooth, with a soft, pulsating glow along its rim. There were no engines, no lights like a conventional aircraft, just this immense, impossible object hanging in the air. James froze, unable to move or even breathe properly. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming. Then the humming began, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to penetrate his bones, making it hard to think. He staggered backward, tripping over a rock, his mind racing. He knew he had to get back in the car, but a compulsion rooted him to the spot, forcing him to stare. The light along the rim of the craft grew brighter, and for a moment he felt as if it were studying him. Suddenly, without warning, beams of light shot down from the craft, scanning the desert floor. James instinctively ducked, pressing himself against the hood of his car. The beams swept past him, and he realized with a shock that they were following him, honing in. Panic surged, and he slammed the car into gear, tires spinning on the loose gravel as he tore down the road, the beams chasing him. The craft lifted with him, rising higher but maintaining its pace, moving faster than anything that should have been possible. James glanced in the rearview mirror, heart in his throat. The sky behind him was filled with the pulsing glow, the unnatural shape of the object impossible to mistake. It was real, and it was following him. He drove for what felt like hours, every nerve screaming. The desert seemed endless, roads twisting in ways that didn't make sense. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the craft vanished. No trace, no sound, nothing but the quiet desert night. James pulled over, chest heaving, mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. When he finally reached the nearest town, he checked into a small motel, hands still trembling. He tried to rationalize it. Stress, exhaustion, perhaps even some drug reaction from the energy drinks he'd been consuming. But deep down, he knew he hadn't imagined it. He had felt the hum, seen the beams, and experienced the presence in a way no hallucination could replicate. The next day, he couldn't stop thinking about it. He wandered through town, buying supplies, trying to get back to normal. That night, unable to sleep, he drove back toward the desert, hoping maybe it was a fluke, something explainable. But the feeling of being watched never left him. At around 11 p.m., while driving down a particularly desolate stretch of road, the sky lit up again. This time, several lights appeared, moving erratically, as if they were playing a game. James stopped the car, his body rigid with fear. The lights converged above him, forming a single, massive craft, hovering silently just beyond the tree line. He could see details now, the smooth metallic surface, the lights pulsating rhythmically, almost as if they had a heartbeat. The humming returned, louder, vibrating through the air and the very ground beneath his tires. James felt paralyzed, unable to move, unable to scream. Then a beam of light shot down, enveloping him in an intense, almost suffocating brightness. His vision blurred and the world seemed to tilt. He felt weightless, as if lifted from the ground. Panic surged, his mind screaming for escape, but he couldn't move. The hum intensified, and then a presence entered his mind, a communication that was not spoken but felt, a series of impressions, emotions, and images that flooded his consciousness. They showed him the desert from above, the curvature of the earth, stars beyond counting. He saw their craft move faster than light, disappear and reappear, explore places humans could only imagine. And then a chilling realization: they had been observing him, studying him for reasons he didn't understand. Curiosity, experimentation, something else entirely. When the sensation passed, he was back on the road, car intact, no visible signs of the encounter, except for a lingering pressure in his chest and an overwhelming sense of being marked, as if some invisible tether connected him to the craft. He didn't stop driving until the first hints of dawn painted the desert sky. Over the next weeks, James's life began to unravel. He couldn't sleep, plagued by vivid dreams of the craft, of the beings, of impossible landscapes. He tried to tell friends, but no one believed him. "You must have been dreaming," they said. Maybe stress. But the scratches on his hands, the faint burn on his neck, and the lingering hum in his mind told him differently. He began researching, digging into reports of similar encounters in Utah, Arizona, New Mexico. He found hundreds of testimonies, people describing the same type of craft, the same presence, the same missing time. Names, dates, locations, they were all different, but the patterns were unmistakable. And in almost every account, there was a sense that those who had been chosen or taken were forever changed, haunted by memories they couldn't fully recall. James became obsessed. He stopped going to work regularly, stopped seeing friends, pouring himself into research, trying to understand. He started documenting every detail, every anomaly, every dream. The dreams became more vivid, more terrifying. Visions of being lifted into the craft, of alien landscapes, of eyes watching him, always watching. He began to notice changes in his perception, small distortions in time, unexplainable flashes of memory from places he had never been. One night, while camping alone in a remote canyon, he experienced something he would never forget. The stars above were bright, the desert silent. Then a soft glow appeared in the distance. He froze as it grew larger, forming the unmistakable shape of the craft. The humming began again, low at first, then building into a deafening vibration that shook the canyon walls. James tried to run, but the sensation of being weightless returned. The beam enveloped him, lifting him into the air. This time he felt something different: curiosity, almost affection from the beings. The telepathic communication returned, conveying images, emotions, a story of their presence on Earth, of observation, study, and preservation. They weren't hostile, not exactly, but their methods were invasive, incomprehensible. Hours, or maybe minutes later, he was back on solid ground. The craft was gone, but the memory remained, vivid, permanent. He staggered back to his car, trembling, knowing his life had changed irrevocably. He couldn't ignore it, couldn't forget it. James eventually moved away, trying to escape the constant presence he felt, the sense of being watched, followed, but it never left him. Lights in the sky, strange dreams, sudden feelings of vertigo or unease. Everything reminded him of that night and the nights that followed. Years later, he occasionally drives out into the desert, hoping to see them again, to understand, to communicate. He keeps a detailed journal filled with sketches, notes, and maps. He knows he will never fully escape them, that his encounter marked him for life. The desert, the night sky, the stars, all of it is tied to that moment, and he will carry it with him until the day he dies. Some nights, lying in bed, he sees a faint glow outside his window, and he knows with absolute certainty that they are still out there, still watching, still waiting. Story the end. It was the summer of 2008, and I was 24. working as a seasonal ranger at a small state park in northern Michigan. The job was simple in theory: patrol the trails, maintain facilities, keep hikers safe, and report any unusual sightings. Most of the time, it was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you question every rustle in the bushes and every snap of a twig. That summer, though, I encountered something that shook me in ways I still can't fully articulate. I remember the day vividly. It was a Thursday, and the air was sticky with humidity. I had just finished my morning rounds along the Chippewa Trail, a dense stretch of forest that bordered the park's western edge. The trees were tall and thick, blocking out the sunlight so that the forest floor was always in perpetual twilight, no matter the time of day. I usually loved this trail, loved the solitude it offered, but that day felt different from the start. As I walked, I noticed the birds had gone silent, not just a few. Every bird, every squirrel, every insect I usually saw or heard was gone. The silence pressed in on me, and my skin prickled with that familiar premonitory feeling you get before something is wrong. I shrugged it off. Maybe the weather, maybe they sensed a storm coming. I continued my patrol, radio clipped to my belt, with a flashlight in hand, just in case. About 2 miles into the trail, I saw something that made me freeze. At first, I thought it was a large black bear. Michigan isn't exactly short on them, but then I realized it was too upright, too symmetrical. It wasn't moving like an animal. It just stood there. Tall, impossibly tall, maybe 8 feet if I had to estimate, with long, gangly limbs. Its skin was dark, almost reflective, like polished obsidian. Its head was large, smooth, and oval-shaped, with eyes that glimmered unnaturally in the filtered light. I should have run. I should have screamed, called it in, anything. But I was frozen, staring back at it as if my body had forgotten how to move. It tilted its head, just slightly, as if studying me. And then it moved. Oh, it moved in a way I can't describe, gliding rather than walking, silent. The ground beneath it didn't seem to make a sound. I instinctively reached for my radio, but my hand trembled so hard I almost dropped it. I whispered into it, "Dispatch, I see something." Static, just static. My eyes stayed locked on the figure as it slowly raised one long, thin arm. I thought maybe it was going to wave. I thought maybe I would die before I could blink. And then, just like that, it was gone. Not behind a tree, not into the brush. It was gone, vanished as if it had never been there. I stumbled back along the trail, heart hammering, radio useless in my hand. I finally reached my ranger station and locked the doors behind me. My coworker, Jenna, laughed at my story at first. She's a city girl, never took the woods seriously, and probably thought I was joking. I wasn't. She didn't know what I had seen, what had frozen me in place for those terrifying seconds. That night, I didn't sleep. Every shadow in my small cabin seemed alive. Every whisper of wind against the window sounded like it was something more than wind. The next day, I went back to the trail, partly to convince myself it had all been a hallucination. Maybe the heat, maybe the isolation, maybe stress, something rational. But when I got there, I saw the marks. Not footprints exactly, but depressions in the soft soil, elongated, perfectly symmetrical, like nothing I'd ever seen. They started near the spot I first saw it and stretched deeper into the forest. No signs of underbrush being trampled, no broken branches, nothing except the impressions. They stopped abruptly after 100 feet, as if whatever had made them had disappeared into thin air. I reported it, of course. The senior ranger chuckled and said it was probably a deer or a moose, misidentified in the dim light. He had no explanation for the impressions. That night, my cabin door creaked, a subtle sound I couldn't place. I had locked it. I was certain of it. The windows were shut. I lay in bed, flashlight clutched in my hands, hearing faint scratches along the walls like fingernails tracing the wood. I didn't sleep at all that night, and the next day I requested a shift change. I couldn't bear being alone in the forest. Weeks went by. I tried to forget it, tell myself it was some weird fever dream or trick of the light. Then came the phone call. Jenna was hysterical, crying, whispering. "It's back," she said. "It's following me." She refused to elaborate, and I couldn't get anything coherent out of her. The call ended abruptly with a high-pitched, static screech. I tried calling her back, but her line was dead. I drove to her apartment late at night, found her room empty, her front door unlocked, and no sign of struggle. The only thing out of place was her bedroom window, open, even though she never left it open. Her laptop was still on her bed, screen cracked in the corner, displaying nothing but static. I called the authorities, but they chalked it up to a runaway case. No forced entry, no signs of kidnapping, no footprints. Nothing. Just gone. I tried to explain what I had seen, but the look on their faces told me they thought I was a nutcase. The forest, my forest, had secrets I wasn't supposed to know, and I had become the harbinger of one. That summer ended. I quit my ranger job and left Michigan entirely. I moved south to a more populated area, hoping distance would bring sanity. It did not. For months, I would see glimpses of it in dreams, always in the periphery of my vision. Tall, silent, impossible, watching. I would wake up gasping, sometimes to find scratch marks on my furniture, long and thin, not human. I would call my parents, my siblings, friends, but nobody could see what I saw. It was as if acknowledging it brought it closer. Years passed. I tried dating, living a normal life, but I never felt alone. Always the feeling that someone, something, was observing me. I began recording my dreams, noting patterns. Always the same. The figure appeared near bodies of water, near trees, near roads when I was driving late at night. It never attacked, never moved in a straightforward manner, just observed. And always the same impossibly bright eyes, reflecting nothing, absorbing everything. One night, I was driving back from a late shift at a convenience store. It was dark, roads nearly empty. A full moon illuminated the asphalt. I noticed a figure standing on the side of the road, tall, slender, staring at me with those eyes. I slammed on the brakes, heart hammering, but it didn't move. I called 911, pulled over, and the operator couldn't see anything on the highway camera. When I stepped out, flashlight in hand, the figure was gone, yet the asphalt was perfectly dry around me, except for a single long depression imprint, as if someone's or something had hovered just above the ground. I swear to this day the imprint was still warm. I started researching, cautiously, obsessively, local legends, UFO sightings, unexplained disappearances. Patterns emerged. Areas with thick forests near lakes or rivers often reported tall, humanoid figures, sometimes described as having reflective or metallic skin, sometimes no visible face at all. Witnesses often reported the same feeling I had, paralyzing fear, sense of being studied, vanishing footprints. The reports spanned decades. North Carolina, Oregon, New Mexico, Alaska, always the same entity almost, like the same observer moving silently across the country. I realized in a chilling clarity that I had encountered something far larger than a single anomaly. This wasn't just a strange encounter, it was a species of observation, patient, methodical, utterly alien. I tried to rationalize it scientifically, maybe a human experiment gone wrong, maybe an unknown animal, some genetically engineered predator. None of it fit. Nothing could account for the sudden disappearance, the vanishing footprints, the lack of sound, the impossibly tall form, the reflective eyes. Nothing. One evening, my paranoia peaked. I installed cameras around my house, infrared, motion sensors, night vision. For months, nothing. And then, at 3:17 a.m., I saw it, standing in my backyard in the faint glow of the infrared light, impossibly tall, impossibly still. Watching, I froze. The cameras captured everything, a silent observer, eyes reflecting the light back like liquid silver. I called the police. By the time they arrived, it was gone. No tracks, no signs of entry, nothing. Only the camera footage remained. I haven't stopped seeing it since. Driving home late, walking my dog, hiking in forests far from Michigan. It appears, sometimes briefly, sometimes for hours, always observing, never aggressive. A silent sentinel from another reality, perhaps, keeping watch on me, on humanity. I don't know why. I don't know what it wants. All I know is that I can never fully escape it, never fully feel safe. And some nights, when the wind whistles through my windows, I swear I can hear the soft, gliding steps of something standing just beyond the edge of the light, silently studying, waiting. The encounter changed me. I am careful about the woods now, about dark highways, about abandoned places. I don't travel alone after dark. I don't leave the house without a means of communication. And yet, I live in constant awareness that something out there, something impossible, watches. I don't know if it studies humans like a biologist studies animals, or if it's observing for reasons beyond my comprehension. I only know it exists, and it knows I exist. The strangest part, perhaps the most terrifying, is the way it seems to track patterns. It knows when I drive, when I walk, when I sleep. It doesn't act randomly. It anticipates me. And even now, writing this, I feel the hair on the back of my neck rise, as if its eyes are on me, reflecting in the glow of my screen. That summer of 2008 was not an isolated event. It was the beginning of a lifelong encounter, something that is patient, silent, unyielding, and impossible to categorize. Something that humanity will never fully understand, but which is very much real. And so I continue to live cautiously, wary of every shadow, every flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, every unusual silence in the woods. I know it will never stop watching. I know it will appear again someday, and I have no choice but to endure the terror of its silent observation. That is the reality I live with. Not monsters that attack or kill, but monsters that watch, that observe, that remind you that the world is far larger, far stranger, and far more indifferent to human life than any rational mind can accept. I know now, without a shadow of doubt, that the encounter was real. It was not a hallucination. It was not a trick of the light or heat. It was something else, something entirely outside the realm of human understanding. And I am haunted by it still, every day, every night, for the rest of my life. Story the end.